A lot of things come to mind when one thinks of South Africa and Vietnam. It could be the unique way of cultural appeals that each one has to offer, from food, art, music, dance, and overall nature to their way of living. But when one really thinks about the one defining theme that each one has to offer the world, it would be their wildlife. From South Africa's elephants, African buffalo, lions, and leopards, to Vietnam's Soala, leaf-nosed bat, the vampire flying frog, and Edward's pheasant. Each one shares a bright connection of natural beauty and overall the best that nature has to offer. But there is one dark connection that both countries share. Being separated by an ocean and two different continents, they have in common their affiliation in the black market trade of rhino horns. Their wildlife population, economic growth, poverty rate, corruption of government, and overall customs tell the same story of the rhino's downfall from prestige to near extinction. Over the decades since European colonization of the African continent, the wildlife began to see a rapid depopulation. After the years when the Europeans left the continent, the effects of the wildlife sport hunting did not go away with them. The scars that are left behind on the continent were too deep, and some did not heal. It led to the extinctions of a vast number of different animals. Sport hunting was more or less for trophies of animals to be stuffed or be mounted on walls as decoration. But the new prize for hunting down wild animal isn't for decoration. It's more for a pseudo-medicine. Asian countries in particular have a traditional belief that exotic animal parts help the body in different ways. This could be from helping a hangover, diabetes, heart disease. But for rhino horns, it's more obscure. It's believed to be the cure for everything. That even includes cancer. In 2008, a rumor had begun to emerge that rhino horns and the powder that comes from them had cured a Vietnamese politician's cancer. Even professional doctors vouch for the rhino horn's cancer-curing properties, making some patients spend up to $2,000 worth of rhino powder. Now you may be asking yourself, well, isn't Vietnam a poor country? How could he even afford the horns? Well, statistics tell us another story. Well, statistics tell us otherwise. As we can see, the spending power of the Vietnamese dong has grown significantly since the Great Recession of 2008. There we can see the economic growth from 2005 to 2016. This would mean that the Vietnamese people are able to spend more for their buck. But what does this have to do with rhinos? Well, it has everything to do with it. From every single database I've searched up, the data tells the number of poaching happening in South Africa has been increasing since 2007, correlating with the purchasing power of the Vietnamese. Even down to the laws Vietnam passes had affected this poaching. In 2014, Vietnam joined 45 other countries in signing on the. In 2014, Vietnam joined 45 other countries in signing onto the London Declaration on Illegal Wildlife Trade. And when we look back at the graph, it shows just that. And that's just with 47 other countries. But Vietnam made that sole impact. Now you may be also asking, well, who does all the killing? Why are they doing all the killing? That has to do with South Africa's poverty. Here it shows that the unemployment rate is about 25%. This shows that black natives of the country that make up a larger overall population have less income than the minority empowered whites. This is partly due to racial discrimination on the early South African government's fault, but the effects are still clearly shown. Being as how there are a lot of unemployed people and jobs that don't pay enough to even keep the lights on, it brings many black natives with no other option to feeding their families than to go out into the wild in hopes of killing a rhino. If they do come back with the horn, then they're treated as heroes by their poor families for bringing in money to survive. The traffickers pay them even more money than they would earn in a year's worth. The traffickers pay them even more money than they would earn working. The traffickers pay them even more money than they would earn working at a dead-end job. But what's the pay for rhino horns? Well, for every single horn, for even a single horn, it costs up to $300,000 just for one. But why are they killing off their source of revenue? What's the point in killing off rhinos if they need them for their horns? Well, that's because they're in it for the short run. As we can see, the profit of rhino horn hunting correlates with As we can see, the profit for rhino hunting correlates with every graph that I've shown from 2007 and onwards. They tell the same story. With rhino horns being perceived with great value in Vietnam, it would only make sense in the poacher's mind to apply the economic model of supply and demand. With less rhinos being around means less horns, but that also means that the value of just one horn goes up. Even the laws in signing that Vietnam has passed and took part of has affected the value of it. With greater risk comes a greater cost. We've seen this before with the drug war. This shows the price of drugs in the US after the drug war was declared. And when was it declared? In 1971. Once laws are being enforced, the price goes up. Throughout all the data we've seen, there's been a correlation with wealth and poaching, price and law, a culture's belief and a government's influence. Throughout all the data we've seen, there's been a correlation with wealth and poaching, price and law, a culture's belief and a government's ineffectiveness to resolve poverty. There is no outlier, there is no anomaly. There is no outlier here, no room for misunderstanding. The Vietnamese misunderstanding and forced grip on cultural belief in respects to medicine. But not just that alone is responsible for rhino horn hunting. There is also a great demand for carving the horns. Both the countries of Vietnam and South Africa are to blame for the rhino's decline.